All right, what's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Crossroads, and also welcome to the listeners of the Long Game. Today, we are back talking about house hacking. I think this is like something that's become popular, I would say, over the last number of years. Like, I'm actually been surprised of how many of my clients have talked about wanting to do this. And Trayton, maybe you're even the first one that's been like, this is what I really want to do. And as I've kind of explored Indianapolis, there's so many duplexes and triplexes that like I'm starting to realize that this is a really common thing to do.
Yeah, I thought because I had heard about it a few years ago. I don't know, it was probably from something from Bigger Pockets. But it always just kind of sounded like something that wasn't really real. It's like, oh, you can live for free, you can do this. I'm like, there's got to be some sort of catch. Like, and I mean, there is like little stipulations, like you might have to live in the place for a year to qualify for the good down payment. But like it truly is just like a money strategy, honestly. Like if you can find a good place and qualify for a loan and just buy good real estate, like it's truly like a good wealth building strategy for sure.
Yeah, I think like we kind of preach all the time, like that primary home is not this amazing investment. Like sometimes it can be, obviously, if you bought a house in Austin a year or two ago, or some of these really poppin' cities, your house can end up being an investment. But generally, you don't have this huge return on investment. And so we don't try to push people go from rent to buying because it's this huge, great financial decision. It is better, I will say that, but we don't necessarily need to rush into it. But what house hacking does is it kind of gives you okay, I can own a home. I can also build equity quicker. It's also basically a rental property that I get to live in. And for me and a lot of other people, like the headaches of having a rental property sound like a lot. But I think at least if it's like the house that you're kind of in, it makes it a little bit easier if somebody calls that you just have to walk on over to the other side. And so I think it can kind of relieve some of the headaches. I think the other side of it, and I guess to kind of explain, is house hacking is more than just I have a duplex, I have one side, you have the other side. Like I know of people that have like a garage that they turn into an Airbnb. I actually had a client that I worked with that they lived in downtown Indy. They had this back little storage area that they turned into a place that they were renting for $1,600 a month. And their mortgage was like $1,800. And it was just a little, they turned it into a one bedroom apartment. And I even know other people who they'll do the opposite. They'll buy a house, they'll have a storage unit behind, they'll live in the storage unit or
Mhm.
like smaller place because they're single, rent out the whole house, and they'll be making money per month to just live there. And so I think when you think of the idea of that, it's pretty attractive because it's like I basically get to live for free, and these other people are also building the equity. It's not even just, hey, I'm like in an apartment for free. It's they're basically building the equity for you in a house, and you're paying nothing. Even if you're not profiting off of it, that's a win in my book.
Yeah, because then at the end of the mortgage, like you should have a fully paid off asset that's in your name that someone else funded for you. Like it almost, and it still just almost like doesn't even feel like it could be real, like the way you say it like that. But um like for my situation, like like when I started the business in 2020, like money was tight at that time, and I was like looking through my personal expenses all the time, and just like every month I'm like, if I could just get rid of this stupid housing payment, like things would be so much easier. Like that was, I mean, at the time it was like probably 75% of my budget just because all the other expenses were so low. And I remember just like googling like how do I get rid of my housing payment. I was like, should I like work for the apartment or something and just like get free housing, or just I was just curious what the options were, and then kind of like re-stumbled across house hacking. I was like, okay, let me dive into this a little bit more. And if anyone wants to learn a lot about house hacking, like go listen to the Bigger Pockets podcast. Like they've been recording podcasts and videos about this specific stuff for like the past 10 years. Like that is the best place to start for sure. But yeah, I mean, I was just thinking like, how do I get rid of my housing payment? Because I wanted to free it up so I could travel and just like invest more in the business and do things like that. And it almost seemed counterintuitive at the time. It's like you always kind of hear like a house ties you down, But if it's done right and you kind of know your reasoning behind it and you wanted to house hack, like buying the house almost gives you the most freedom possible if you can find like that second or third renter, just depending how big you get, and really just remove that housing payment, and then that frees up cash flow for whatever you want it to be, because most people, like, housing is definitely their biggest expense in their budget, and getting rid of that, you could travel, you could do whatever, you could invest more, you could, I mean, the options are really endless once you have more cash flow.
And if you're in a cool city, like if you're kind of doing what you're talking about, where you have the duplex or triplex and you want to travel, you could also then Airbnb your side when you leave. So you're kind of like, hey, I'm already breaking even. Now I can use the money I'm going to use the Airbnb to help pay for wherever I'm going to go. So this is definitely a way to be able to hack a lot of your life. And I actually agree. Like for me, I've kind of thought about, I definitely want to keep my housing payment low. I mean, if you look, my place is actually really nice, and it's almost 50% of my monthly expenses go to living here. And it's something to me that's worth it. It's still only 25% of my income that I'm using per month. So, that number is okay, but I'm with you. Like paying for my housing as a single person living by myself in a nice apartment ends up becoming a lot of what you do, where figuring out a way to get rid of that payment. Like to me, if I got rid of this payment somehow, I would be able to invest 75% of my income per month and I still do everything that I want to do,
Mhm.
but I just don't overspend on things that I don't care about.
Exactly. And I think, I mean, I'm kind of hoping, like, because my plan is to hopefully buy it next year, because then I'll have like 2 decent years of 1099 income. And I mean, one thing we didn't really hit on, like with house hacking, the nice thing, because with most investment properties, like if you're just trying to go out and buy something, get cash flow, whatever, you're most likely going to have to put at least 20% down on it. But if you house hack, because you're living in the property that you're buying and renting it out, or yeah, I guess renting it out to someone else, you don't have to put 20% down because you're living there. So you can get all the way, you probably could get down to 0% like some situations, but normally it could be like 3.5, 5%. And on $100,000 house, like depending on what market you're in, like that could only be a few $1,000s down, and you're getting this asset that you can then kind of leverage. So like for me, like once I get the first property and live there for a year, my plan right now at least is to then maybe do it again, or maybe I'll have different cash flow at that time, like I could buy something else. But just keeping that very original first property, then bringing another renter into it, and then that thing should be like way cash flow positive, because the first renter when I was living there should cover about the mortgage. Bring in a second one, then that's basically doubling your mortgage payment, so you're positive cash flow, and then you're just kind of slowly building your real estate portfolio over time, and you should over time have just positive cash flow coming from your real estate investments. And then you have everything else that you're investing in at the same time, whether it be IRAs, 401ks, whatever else.
Yeah, I think I've heard a bunch of stories of people where they kind of start like that. You have the one duplex, triplex, they live in it, they try to generate as much cash flow as they can. And, then you use some of that to go to the next property. And then you go to the next property, and all of a sudden they have 10 different places like this that are generating $10,000 a month in reoccurring revenue. You start to build that more, you can actually hire a property manager to make it more passive for you. I mean, to be able to do that, honestly, sounds really good and would actually just be really cool, especially if you're interested in that. And then especially like for people that are handy, if you were able to like do some of the projects on your own,
Mhm.
you can really set yourself up well by doing that. I think the interesting thing to think about is when you do regular rental properties, the goal is cash flow. So most of the time you're going to take the 30-year mortgage because you want to free up as much cash flow as you can. I wonder if for some people this changes when house hacking. In my mind, I feel like 30-year mortgage would still make sense to keep that cost low, give you the flexibility to pay more, but also then it ends up making your costs probably closer to zero. Because if you get that mortgage up to 15 or 20 years, you might not be able to get the rental payment where you're still paying something. And then
Mhm.
you use that freed up cash flow to invest, which, we always talk about invest or pay off debt. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. And I mean, especially with interest rates where they are right now, like I would definitely go 30-year, like if the numbers made sense. It just because I had kind of like dove into the numbers a little bit, and ramping down or going down to the 15-year was way tighter on like the
Yeah.
potential positive cash flow side. So it's like, and I know I think we did like a whole episode kind of on like the 15 versus
Yeah.
30, and especially when you're playing the cash flow game, like you got to do what you got to do on that side for
Yeah.
sure.
I guess I mean, obviously, like everything else, it comes down to your goals. Because if your goal was, hey, I'm going to live in here and I'm just basically going to try to live for free for a really long time, then you probably do the 30 or have them try to cover that cost. But if your goal is also like, hey, I'm going to live here for like a couple years before I'm going to get married and have kids, I'm going to turn it into another rental property. I
Mm.
guess that could maybe change it, because then you could say, hey, I'm not going to try to do a ton of these, but if I could get this paid off really quickly, and I'm going to have a second renter that eventually will definitely more than cover what that 15-year mortgage is, you could do that. But if you're going to try to accumulate a lot of properties, obviously generating the cash flow is what becomes really important. So you can accumulate enough money for future down payments. Because as you said, if you're not going to go live at that next one and have that be your primary residence, now this is a rental property, you are going to have more cash to put down.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think, which I plan on kind of documenting the whole process of going to look at properties, like going through kind of the application process, the pre-approval, like moving into like doing renovations if I have to. Like I'm just like super interested in real estate as a whole. And I think it's not really talked about too much in like a personal finance setting. It almost feels like it's kind of reserved for accredited investors in a way. And like there's definitely some real estate that is, but with things like house hacking and just like little strategies and stuff, like real estate can be a place for a lot of people to invest, like not investment advice, but like things like REITs and just other things like
Crowdfunding
there's
too.
fundraise. What
Yep.
was that?
I was going to say there's like exactly Fundrise. There's other crowdfunding places where you can buy a set, basically shares of
Mhm.
some investment type property.
Yeah, and it's like in an overall investment strategy, like you want to go for diversification, and real estate can definitely provide that for sure.
Yeah, I think, I mean, to me, it makes a lot of sense. I think at the end of the day, like you really want to start to think about, does this sound like something you want to do? Like, in theory, it is good, but if like you're somebody that's going to hate having, renters call or, something to be fixed up, like maybe it isn't the best thing for you. I know a lot of people who hate that and then did it. And now they're like, all they wanted to do is get rid of that property.
Mm.
And I guess a good last way to end it is maybe some of the downsides of this. I think it's only fair because we made it sound really good. It is really good. But I think some of the downsides, one is that you're going to have people that you don't know living, in the same area as you. So like, I guess that's not very different than an apartment. Like you could have people near you that could be dangerous or, whatever other bad things. So that's
Mhm.
one. Um,
You might not be cash flow positive, but then it's like you're still probably paying less than whatever you were renting elsewhere. Like I've really tried to like think through a lot of the downsides, and like
I think the
I've been
downside comes down to like dealing with the renter themselves. So like my sister, they rushed into buying a house right after she graduated college, ended up deciding to move like 2 years later. Housing market wasn't great, so they weren't able to really sell the house for any good offers. So they brought in a renter. The renter didn't pay, like just decided not to pay. And so like for 3, 4 months go by, they come in, they never let them in. And you can't just walk into the house of the person that you're renting. So then it's, well, what do you really do? And are you going to go pay a lawyer that's going to cost more than the rent that you're missing? So I think most of the headaches come down to like, you still have to go and approve. Um, you still have to basically go and approve all of the renters. You have to like make sure that they have the right
collect
financial
payments.
information. Yeah, you have to collect payments. Like it isn't truly passive, which I feel like is really the downsides. But if that's something that you want to do, there are a lot of great upsides to it.
Yeah, and I guess one downside could kind of happen while you're planning for it, because like if if you're planning to have like $500 positive cash flow or something, and that's going into all your projections, like you're adjusting your personal expenses for this extra 500, and then maybe you don't get a renter as soon as you move in, and then that just throws off everything because you had planned for this $500 positive if you had a renter, but it's like that is definitely not guaranteed. So especially when you're planning for it, like you have to run through a lot of different scenarios, like best case, worst case, like what should kind of happen, and then weigh all the risks off that.
And you have to renew too. Like people might end up like you might lose there after a year, somebody leaves, and then you could have filling times where, hey, I don't have somebody for a few months, and that's obviously something to plan for.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so obviously that's house hacking, something that, Trayton's obviously really interested in, probably going to do. Hopefully he comes up to Indy and does it here. But obviously something for you guys to think about, as it could be a really cool financial opportunity. So thanks again for coming to listen, guys. This was, we just love producing this content, creating all these episodes, and we'll be back next week with Carl Richards. So be on the lookout for that one.